And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
This afternoon, this morning, as I was walking over the bridge to teach classes over in DeWolf, and I was walking over there, and as I did so, I spotted a folded piece of paper. This one, in fact. Many sheets of paper. Having seen a similar one quite a few years ago, I knew what it was immediately. You know, the armies of Satan get quite riled up around St. Michael's Conference, and numerous communications get sent from hell every day with various instructions of various demons sent to attack this conference. And since I had procrastinated in writing my talk for tonight and didn't even get it done this afternoon, I thought I would just read this particular communication to all of you so that you can get an idea of what we're all up against. And in order to illustrate my point, I brought a problem. My dear worldling, I need not tell you in this letter the severity of your situation at this point. It's Friday of the conference, which bears the name of our venerable foe. I won't cause you pain by repeating his name. A year ago, we were rejoicing. This gathering had to be called off due to one of the greatest successes we have ever had. You know, COVID-19. That is us. The churches were mostly closed. We had succeeded in convincing so many that their earthly life was more essential than their spiritual life. Their life which they so pathetically offer with delightful lukewarmness before our enemy above, but are happy to give up when convenience or respectability or just a nice warm bed on a Sunday morning is at stake. Even when their parishes did reopen, we were successful in getting them to scorn one another about such things as masks and vaccines and little blue gloves. And even better, when those who were the so-called traditional element scorned those who even to this day have not returned to their rueful and half-hearted groveling before our enemy above, we had won. But now those bothersome priests and counselors have succeeded in bringing back a plague upon which our forces have unstoppable terrors and dreadful loss. This year, they have even succeeded in recruiting a consecrated celibate. Terrible, tremble to me to even write those two words together to join their faculty. Imagine what's going on in the minds of some of these young women, that they might respond to our enemy's call to spurn our most successful weapons in our fight: material possessions, worldly status, and even sex. Our defeat, if she succeeds, is assured. This very evening, we understand that confessions will be heard, and that confessions will be heard. And that although we have succeeded in keeping nearly half of the conference from this dreadful practice, consider what a disaster it would be if any more should undertake it tonight. You know what would happen. There would be rejoicing in the enemy camps above, and I need not tell you what pain that gives me, let alone pain it gives to our Lord below. These troublesome priests will tell these vulgar creatures that our enemy above forgives them. He will give them the gifts necessary to become holy. And worst of all, they will tell of God's love for sinners. Things couldn't be much more dire. I've even heard reports that there has been much said this year about being a lady or being a gentleman. How can it be that in the very year in which we have finally convinced most of the world that this was an illusion, lady or gentleman, that a human being can not only choose whatever gender they like, it can be a lady or a gentleman, but define what that means for themselves? However they should choose. That this year in the United States we would have to put up with such opposition. Yes, gentlemen, indeed. We know, of course, the truth that our enemy above quite likes to turn male and female. He quite likes these disgusting carnal differences, and inexplicably continues to persist in attempts to persuade these foul creatures that they are all made in his own image. Though we know it is the truth, we must stop it getting out. We know that this is the plan. We gave our very best shot at putting an end to the whole enterprise by killing our enemy above's own son. I need not tell you that it didn't work. Well, not for long anyway. I need not tell you, for you and I were both there, how our city below shook, how we screamed and cried with our compatriots. And we have been on defense ever since. We can only do what we are skilled at: lying, deception, the temptation of enticements. We must go back to the fundamentals. Convince these foul creatures that they would be better off, that they would have a better life, even though we are just if they sought material and sensual pleasures. That the girlfriend or the boyfriend is all they need to complete them. That the difficulties of continuing in what they so shamelessly call orthodoxy or Catholicism. Sorry. Those two words make me want to vomit. But those difficulties are not real. But instead of repeating myself, I want to give you a very simple method for gaining the upper hand. First, you must not fail to understand the danger of your situation. Nephew, your particular patient is now in the throes of an excitement he couldn't have expected on Sunday afternoon. He is now, quite to his astonishment, content to sit through an entire hour of that dreadful singing and kneeling and praying. In fact, I understand that he likes it, that he now believes he can have no greater thing to do in his pathetic life. Yes, we know that all of this is very true. But you must do your best to persuade him otherwise. Here are just a few helpful hints as to how to do it. I've had much success in the past by simply suggesting to patients that have gone to this intolerable conference that the local parish church doesn't take their religion as seriously as he does. That all of those people lack fervor, refinement, that they are hypocrites, that he should be scorned. If this fails, get him to complain about how the local priest doesn't use incense as much as you wish. Or doesn't say the Mass like the priest at St. Mike's that he has watched this week. Certainly we know that what they call sacraments are the same in every place. The Mass is the Mass, the priest is the priest. But his knowing it will be the end of us. Convince the patient that what he has just experienced is the real thing, and only to be experienced once a year. That what happens in his parish church is really just pathetic and uninspiring. That every attempt must be made to keep him from seeing that it really is the same thing. That he can get every bit of learning and praying and singing, and even that most terrible thing for us, confession. That his parish church, parish priest, just as much as he did this week. You must observe the facts. You must obscure the facts. That's what we do best. Suggest to your patient that his parish priest is much too busy to hear his confession, or even better, that his parish priest will judge him. Or beyond that his parish priest is, well, a big fat phony thing. We know the truth. We know that you're full of love for sinners. They will drop everything to hear your confession. attempts must be made to pursue this. Suggest to the patient that the parish church is exclusively for people 4 times his age or more. He may come to believe that he would be better served by a congregation that is more stylish, more modern, or one of those, what do they call them? Oh yes, youth groups! We often forget the utility of this idea, by the way, that there is no place for him in the parish church, that it must be that the parish provides a special place for him. It has served us quite well in the past. Do give it a try. We have won many to our side by trivializing every element of creedal faith by use of game nights, pizza parties, and contemporary worship experiences. In addition, you might attempt to convince the patient that there are more important things to be done, making friends, achieving prowess in sports, or making money, good grades even, than his duties to the church. You must even persuade his parents of the fact, failing that. Unchecked, he might get to the point where he understands that if he is going to stick with the church, if he is going to stick with his religion, he will have to get serious about prayer, or so-called holiness of life. Holiness of life. Failing dissuading him, we must get the idea into his head that there is plenty of time for all of that, but that for now, while he is young, he must not take these things so seriously. He must enjoy this time of youth. That he can go back when he's married and when he has children, if that ever happens. We've conducted excellent research on this phenomenon in the last few years. We know that he will not, especially if we have convinced him to marry a sensible young woman who has neither the time nor the ambition to be as serious as he is when it comes to religion. You must convince him that if he wants friends, or a good job, or to be loved, he must dispense with this childishness immediately. He must become grown up, and oh, how I delight in using this word, he must become rational. The most urgent matter, however, is that you do all that you can to keep him from seeing the truth. That our enemy above pathetically, but actually and really loves him. Loves him! A pathetic little worm! Get him to believe that our enemy might not love him or others as much as he wants them. Get him to try on the idea that what he has experienced this week and what he might be tempted to continue to believe is not what we know it to be, which is true, but something like patriarchy, or oppression, or hateful, or unfit for modern, intelligent, enlightened, woke, I love that word, woke people. Get him to believe that the very people he knows, loves him, are in fact hateful, and that he will only be loved if he shows off his newfound virtue on our most wonderful invention, Instagram. Well, simultaneously and unwittingly serving us. It's brilliant. By the way, even though virtue signaling and grandstanding on social media is all the rage these days, a fad if there ever was one, you must admit that it works quite well. Get him to believe that allegiance to the tribe, peers that he thinks he has, and friends that he thinks he has, but doesn't, is vastly more important than allegiance to our enemy above. If any of this should fail, you can always go back to the primitive, but also extremely reliable methods of enticement to lust, materialism, envy of his neighbor, and separating him off from all those new friends he has made. We have so many temptations at our disposal: gossip, pornography addiction, relativism, and personal data. Above all, we must never forget that our most powerful weapon is the elegant and beautiful scepter of pride. Get him to think that pride is a good thing. That after all, he is a good person and entitled to think well of himself. Suggest to him often that he would be much better off if people would just realize how special he is. There are several ways to do this, even when a patient is always going to church. Get him to believe that he is such a paragon of virtue that he must go around correcting other people in church. That they are genuinely wrong. That they are kneeling wrong. That they are quite wrong. He alone is right. Get him to believe that his attachment to what we both know is actually the truth entitles him to be mean and nasty to others. Finally, when this is done, only one simple suggestion need be made. That if he were in charge of the parish, or the diocese, or even the country, or even the world, everything would be better. Get him to see that he alone can see the truth of his own brilliance. If any of this fails, well, there is always the trusty and faithful classic, involvement in politics. If none of this works, simply suggest to him that he is perfectly and very acceptably already humble. Now, to two other matters which cannot be excluded. By now, he is very likely to be convinced of the efficacy of sacraments. We know they work our enemy's plans to give great gifts to pathetic creatures. We know that through these he offers them his own life. We must not forget that it is this fact which has caused us to rebel in the first place. He is no doubt flying high on fumes of having made a good confession. Or maybe he is about to. That is to our advantage in the coming weeks. We might succeed in one little temptation that will throw him off course, that will lead him to believe that making his confession was of no use to him. Yes, I know what you will say, but it's no use. Confession and absolution are a defeat to us. We might as well give up. No, you must convince the patient of this. That he might as well give up. His devotion to our enemy at the altar, you may have noticed, is also increasing. You must see to it that he abandon it, and soon. He might come to believe that what is more than just unappetizing so-called bread and unpalatable wine, it is more than that. He might come to know the very truth, that in it is contained the very flesh and blood of our enemy's own Son. If this idea persists, well, then you should probably just give up, because he will absolutely have the upper hand. He might come to believe that he is actually loved. He might come to believe that regular confession would help him receive this more clearly, more worthily. He might even come to believe that all the folderol surrounding it actually brings him to the very collision of heaven and earth. Yes, I know. It's all very true. But we must lie all the more rigorously. Tell him it's boring. Tell him it's keeping him from sleeping in. Tell him that he doesn't really need to go because, after all, everyone else is there. Moreover, tell him that he is already a good person and doesn't need it. Second, if he continues in these two despicable practices, you must know that all is not actually lost. That is, so long as he continues to think that he can muddle through without actually praying. The truth is, even attendance at daily Mass can be turned to our advantage if he does not pray. We know that prayer activates the power of divine grace to an exceptional effect. It is the worst trouble we can possibly face with a patient, because he might just become what our enemy calls holy. I'll not mince words, my nephew. If that happens, you will look utterly failed. You must, and I mean must, spare no effort in suggesting to him that he is wasting his time with prayer, that he is praying to a God who does not exist. Oh yes, Anna, we know the truth. You must obscure it. Suggest that mental prayer for even 5 minutes a day is just too much. He will certainly get to the point where he gets tired of praying, where he feels like it just doesn't do any good. That he commits the same sins over and over again, and all this praying has been hopeless. At this point, only one suggestion is to be made, that our enemy above has abandoned him. Again, we know that this is not true. That our enemy above never abandons those whom he so condescendingly calls his children. We actually know that he is on the precipice. He is at the very threshold of real holiness. We know that especially when prayer seems to have stalled is when it is most effective. We know that a dark night of the soul patiently endured has been the cause of our worst losses thus far. That one soul earnestly praying, deliver us from evil, especially when he is surrounded by it, unleashes our enemy's armies in his defense. But he need not know it. Also, do see if there's something you can do to keep them from praying to the opposition general. Every time, without fail, he comes down here with that giant sword, and to be quite honest, I'm tired of living his dreadful furies. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.